I beg you, gods, release me from this drudgery, this year long spent as lookout. Time I've crouched through like some watchdog, bedded up here on the palace roof of Atreus's sons. I've got to know the gathering of the stars, distinguishing those sparkling dynasties which bring the winter and the summer with their rise and fall. And now I'm watching for a token marked in flame, the gleam of fire that brings a word from Troy, the message it has fallen. And in control of this, there waits a heart in hope, a woman's heart that organizes like a man. But as I pass the night upon my restless, dew-drenched bed, it is unvisited by dreams, this bed of mine, because it's fear, not sleep, that visits me and stops my eyes from closing fast. Whenever I would like to sing or hum, dispensing music as a healing antidote, instead I weep for how this house has met bad times, not managed for the best as once it was. Now though, let's hope there'll be a bright release from all this pain, the flame in darkness that declares good news. The beacon. Welcome. Beaming through this night as bright as day, there will be carnivals of song and dance in Argos at this happy turn. Oh, I'm calling clear to Agamemnon's wife. Stir out of bed and quickly as you can, raise through the house a triumph cry of joy in celebration of this flame. The town of Troy is overthrown. The beacon message tells us clear. I'm going myself to dance an overture to match my master's winning throw, because this beacon watch has thrown a 666. At least I hope to greet the ruler of this house and clasp his much-loved hand in this of mine. As for the rest, I'm keeping quiet. A hulking ox is standing on my tongue. The house itself, if it could find a voice, would speak out all too clear. I'm saying this to those who know my drift. For those who don't, it slipped my mind.
Zeus.
Whoever he may be, but Zeus.
If he is contented with that name, remains the title I shall use.
There is no other key or claim, none to compare.
If I should try to balance all the world by weight.
Except for Zeus.
No, not if I still hope to cast my mind disquiet away in reality.
Zeus,
who set us humans on the road to finding wisdom on our own.
And fix this precept for our good.
The truth that learning comes through pain.
Through hearing its persistent drip.
The agony of pain recalled molds our thoughts in place of sleep.
And brings sound mind, although not willed.
This favor from the gods, high throne, is kind, but forcibly laid down. So was it for the other king, commander of the great Greek fleet, not blaming seers for anything, but breathing as the winds inflate, when all host was stuck aground, because the ships could not set sail, and all the soldiers were worn down, their stomachs filled with hunger's pain, pinned where the surging currents roar, encamped on all its sandy shore.
The winds, unrelenting from the northeast, sent them idleness and hunger, insecure at anchor, constant people chafing, rotting ship and cable, stretching out the days redoubled, scouring the Greek bloom to stubble. Then a grimmer course was offered to the leaders by the prophet, medicine for the bitter tempest.
Dissolution. Naming Artemis as plaintiff made the son of Aeschylus beat earth with their scepters.
And there was no keeping bitter tears from dropping. The elder king then poses his dilemma choices.
Heavy chaos waiting for my not obeying. Heavy, though, the future chaos if I butcher my own household, precious glory. Stain my hands with my daughter pouring lifeblood on the altar table. Which of these is clear from evil? How can I desert my navy? How betray my allies? For their keen desire cries for the wind of fate now, for a virgin's blood now. All that's right forbid this. Made what best conclude this.
Once he had placed his neck beneath the harness of what had to be, he turned the breathings of his thought to godless, rank impiety. From then, he turned his mind to foster plans of sheer audacity for clever, scheming madness. Trouble starting can make people bold. And so he steeled his hand to grasp his daughter's sacrificial blade, did all this to support a war of vengeance for a woman's bed. They count as nothing, all her father cries, her pleas, her virgin years, those battle-loving lords.
The father tells his men to pray, and then to raise her high above the altar, like a goat kid for the sacrifice.
With all their will to hold her and her trailing robes in readiness, neck facing down.
They tie a feather round her lovely cheeks and face.
A gag to hold her tongue from words, to put her house beneath a curse.
They use the bridal's brutal force to muffle up her voice.
And as her saffron-tinted cloth fell pouring to the earth,
she shot each leader standing by an arrow from her eye,
imploring pity, beauty standing out as in a work of art.
She longed to call out all their names, since there were so many times
she'd sung the maiden paean hymn within her father's hall,
to chime with their third good luck toast and grace her father's feast.
What happened next upon that day, I never saw nor say.
The things that Calchas' skill foretold did not go unfulfilled.
The scales of justice mete out gain to those who've learnt from pain.
But as for what the future bears, you'll hear as it occurs.
Let be. It will emerge as bright as when the dawn brings light.
Let's hope the rest, at any rate, will turn out fortunate.
As we would wish, us old and loyal, this land's defensive wall.
Hi, welcome to Reading Greek Tragedy Online. I'm Joel Christensen from Brandeis University, and I'm here with the Center for Hellenic Studies, Out of Chaos Theater, the Cosmos Society, and a great collection of actors and surprise guests today. We have Tim Delap, who was the Watchman, Evelyn Miller, who will be coming in later, Eunice Roberts as Clytemnestra, and the chorus is Carlos Bellato and Tamieka Chavis. So this week we turn to the first play of Aeschylus's Oresteia, the Agamemnon, and we'll be following with the two subsequent plays of the next 2 weeks. How famous is the story of Orestes and his father? So famous that it's the very story Zeus himself contemplates at the beginning of the Homeric Odyssey as he looks down in frustration on the man who murdered Agamemnon. Atreus' son, Agamemnon, appears in the middle of the Odyssey and at its end, complaining at each point bitterly about his disloyal wife, Clytemnestra, and praising the vengeance meted out by his son, Orestes. Now, the story of the family of Agamemnon, however, extends back beyond the Trojan War, and then after until the death of Achilles' son Neoptolemus. It starts back with Tantalus and Pelops in Asia Minor, before it moves to the Peloponnese, through sacrilegious meals, infanticide, and fraternal war, all themes highlighted in the main cause of Clytemnestra's rage, the killing of their daughter Iphigenia at Aulis. Now, if this story sounds familiar, it's because it is. In this series, we've heard variations of this tale from Sophocles and Euripides, contemplating both its beginnings and its ends. Indeed, ancient audiences would have been familiar with the story as Zeus is at the beginning of the Odyssey, shaking their heads and wondering how this version will play out. I'm really delighted that we have two special guests here today to help us understand this play and put it into context. We have Fiona Macintosh, and we also have Oliver Taplin, whose translation we are lucky to work with today. So I'd start, I think, with Fiona. Fiona, this play is big in the mind of classicists in the ancient world. Like the Parados we saw alone is famous for its length and its complexity. If you're going to start people out who don't know a lot of Greek and who don't know a lot about this play in Aeschylus, what would you say to situate them? What are some things you'd say are important to know?
I would say that it's big. It's big, but it's the first part of something very big. And I think, as the Watchman, who we've just seen, shows so well, it starts not only in the dark, just before dawn, but it starts with an ordinary person who's been doing for a very long time a very hard job. He's very cold, he's very tired, and he's a watchman, but he's like the dog who's sitting forced to guard the house. And I would start there because he says some interesting things. Yes, he's bored. Yes, he's waiting for something to happen. But matching that darkness is a lot of uncertainty. It's something that's not quite right here, which is a wonderful opening for a play. And in the ancient theatre, our watchmen would have been up high, even though the audience would have been looking down on them. They would have realized that he was probably atop a stage building, and at that point that was quite a kind of scenic kind of novelty. And what is exciting and also very disturbing is that we know inside the house things are not quite right. And for a Greek in the middle of the 5th century BCE, it would have been surprising to think about a woman with a man's heart, as the Watchman tells us, who's in charge of the house. And we also know that there are certain secrets in that house, or we infer there are certain secrets, because the Watchman tells us there's an ox sitting on his tongue. He's looking, waiting for a sign, and then suddenly, as we saw a moment ago, the light comes up. He has spied the beacon that signals that the war at Troy is over, and the ruler of the house, the king, will be returning after 10 years of war. Now, that's the opening. And to announce that opening, to join in that opening, we have the arrival of the chorus. And this is a play with, this is the hard part in a way for someone who doesn't know Greek theatre, although our chorus today was absolutely brilliant in making what happens, what the chorus is of course in the Greek theatre singing about so clear. This was one of the reasons why Aeschylus is difficult for modern audiences, because there's a lot of choral song and a lot of quite complicated language. Here, in this wonderful opening song, we get taken straight to where the war began and where it looks as though it's not beginning, because all of the Greek armies have gathered together in a place called Aulis. And as we heard, there is no wind. People are hungry. People are stranded. People are waiting, and not just waiting, but clearly beginning to get resistant, difficult for the leaders. And then we hear that our seer, Calchas, the priest, finds some solution. And of course, it's a terrible solution. It is suggested that if Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter, Iphigenia, if he does that, the winds will come and the Greeks will be able to go to Troy, the beginning of the war proper, in order to bring back Helen. And this is the famous Helen of Troy, who of course has been abducted, stolen by the Trojans. Various explanations, of course, for that. However, what we find in this amazing opening scene is, as we've heard, the most chilling account told in really graphic terms. Even we've heard like a picture at one point in, as the chorus comment, we watch this young, very young woman, very young daughter being sacrificed by her father. And the detail is extraordinary. I mean, we are told not only is she gagged, but she's also, we hear that her saffron robe, even that detail, falls to the ground and she is sacrificed. And we also learn that the moment that Aeschylus makes it clear, and the chorus pointed out to us, that the moment that Agamemnon decides to put his role as leader, he puts the war over his family, he commits to audacity, I think in Oliver's translation. From then on, the war proper, the war of the house of Atreus, if you like, the family who we're now going to encounter in various forms in multiple generations, that's the beginning of the domestic war. And so this opening scene, complicated as it is, has these moments of really things very local, very immediate. So we have this brilliant sort of shift from the wide angle lens to the local. And so I would, say to people, yes, it's difficult, but let's focus on these little key moments.
So before we move to talk about the translation, and Oliver, I know we're keeping you waiting, but you brought up 2 points, Fiona, about Aeschylus as an innovator or someone who's different that I think are worth highlighting. Because now, in retrospect, when we think about Aeschylus, we think about him as the oldest of the tragedians, right, as the stodgy traditionalist. But from the beginning, we have something that's really significant that I want to highlight from you. So one, this is not your father's Clytemnestra. Right, Clytemnestra in the Odyssey, sure, she's unfaithful, but Aegisthus is the murderer. And two, focusing on Iphigenia in this way, right? I mean, who does not get named in Homer, lets the audience know that that this is different. So, do you think this type of topical difference combines with sort of the theatrical difference, the Watchman on the edge of the darkness?
I think you've highlighted 2 things that have really fascinated modern audiences, modern playwrights, poets who've rewritten this story. And first of all, the Clytemnestra figure. This and I don't want to spoil what we have of her ahead for those who don't know what's in store. But yes, a completely different Clytemnestra, and one whose I can say her own audacity exceeds that of any woman, I think, in the history of theatre. I mean, Lady Macbeth has been compared to her, but Clytemnestra outstrips Lady Macbeth. And the other, as you say, innovation is the figure of Iphigenia. And in recent years, very often, the events at Aulis in Euripides' version of Iphigenia at Aulis, as the play is called, has been kind of prefixed or prefaced to the Agamemnon. It's been the first play in what is not a trilogy now. It becomes a tetralogy that begins with Euripides' account of what happened at Aulis and then moves to the Agamemnon. And if you think of the play in that sequence, Iphigenia becomes even more important. And I think we have to imagine that even though Euripides didn't write his play, obviously much, much later, that audience watching in 458 BC would have known a lot of this backstory and would have known much about Iphigenia as well. And so even if, you know, productions, and very famously the Katie Mitchell London production included the ghost of Iphigenia throughout the first play, the Agamemnon play, the shadow of Iphigenia, the beginning moment, those opening moments at Aulis of the war proper, haunt the play in a very real sense.
And I think it definitely makes us read Clytemnestra differently. And I'm really happy that we have Eunice today to play Clytemnestra, because she's played her in a few other plays and it's been riveting. Now, Oliver, the part we just listened to from Agamemnon, you may find this entertaining or not. In my first year of grad school, I was given it in Greek by David Sider for an exam, the only exam in the course. We had to translate the whole thing, do a metrical analysis, and then write an essay of its relationship to the entire trilogy. And I stayed in grad school despite that. Now, I have to ask you, what motivated your turn to translating the Oresteia, given especially its position as one of those most difficult and challenging texts from the ancient world?
I suppose there's some autobiography from a long time ago there. I think I first when at the age of about 16 or 17, became captivated by Greek tragedy through this very play. Because back in the days, you know, when we spent all our time finding connected imagery, recurrent metaphors and that kind of thing, and I had been approaching English literature in that kind of way, and then I turned to this ancient Greek tragedy, and there it was, you know, absolutely wonderfully rich in recurrent metaphors and images of material objects, of animals, and I became really captivated by that. So I've been fascinated with the Oresteia ever since I was 16, 17, particularly with the Agamemnon, perhaps. I never had time to translate. My job simply didn't allow it. You know, I had to do a lot of teaching, I had to do a lot of research, and I had to do too much administration. I had the ambition to translate from ever since I was a student, but I never had the time. And also, back in 1981, there was an absolutely extraordinary new translation by Tony Harrison. And that was my first ever involvement with the professional theatre. In fact, I went to rehearsals and talked a lot with Tony Harrison about his translation. We went over it a lot. I got to know the actors, went to rehearsals, discussed it with them and so on. So for me, the Tony Harrison translation was kind of dominated my mind for a long time. But with the passage of time, as I began to translate, just in the last 10 or so years, the ambition to translate the Oresteia became overwhelming. And I particularly loved translating lyrics. And this goes for my Sophocles and Euripides translations as well. I found the challenge of translating the lyric passages, the sung passages, the passages that are in these complicated meters, which we can analyze, but we don't really know what their significance is. I found those a particular challenge to try and find some way of turning those into a kind of English equivalent. And as you may have heard coming through, I've relied on a kind of metrical regularity, quite often a kind of ballad, 4-line ballad form, and on rhymes, but not just straightforward rhymes. I particularly love playing with half rhymes, with quarter rhymes, with sound echoes. And that is I found a great challenge, and I've enjoyed very much. But can I just say something about this particular passage we've just heard in relation to what we're going to hear? The Oresteia trilogy as a whole covers 2 generations. The first play, the Agamemnon, that's by far the longest, brilliantly, I think, in an incredible way, manages to paint in the past. And it paints in the past through lyric, not through narrative. It's not described in narrative. It's recreated in the imagination through lyric. So in this passage that we've just heard, it's the departure of the expedition and the sacrifice of Iphigenia that's reconstructed, that's told in this incredibly vivid way that couldn't be done by straightforward narrative. Then in the next chorus, next 2 choruses, you hear all about the sack of Troy, about the departure of Helen, and about the relationship of Helen's arrival in Troy and the disaster at Troy. And it isn't until the Cassandra scene that you're taken back yet further into the past, into the terrible things that have happened in the house, the things that the Watchman hints at. And that those passages I think we'll be hearing. But once again, Cassandra is not a straightforward narrator. You know, she's a visionary. She is a prophet who can see the past and the future, and relates the past and the future to the present. So what this first play brilliantly does, as well as telling its own story, the story of the return of Agamemnon and the power of Clytemnestra, is it also tells through lyric imagination and through choreography. It fills in the generations of the past.
So I love the way that you're talking about lyric as sort of being impressionistic, right, and metonymic and bringing the past forward. And it's fascinating because in a way, Aeschylus is competing with Homer, right, telling the whole story through just a little bit of a window and doing them one better in that he's integrating other genres and other types of song culture into it. So I have great respect for anybody who can take Aeschylean choruses and turn them into coherent meter in English. Anybody who's ever struggled with the Frankel commentary knows how much of it is truly impressionistic, even at the level of syntax. So I know you haven't seen this performed or your translation performed before. What are some things you're looking for or listening to when actors are performing your words?
Well, I suppose there's a difference between the choral passages and the actors' passages. I mean, with the choral passages, I'm listening out above all for musicality. And I'm listening for the way that as you say, the impressionistic words, they're not descriptive, they're evocative, they jump, they ellipse, they move through strange trains of thought. And I listen out for the way that the sounds turn this into the imagination. Whereas in the spoken passages, there is the stage action, there is the embodiment on the stage, and therefore the way I'm looking for the physicality, the materiality, the embodiment. You know, that's what tragedy brings and adds to Homer. Adds to the past. All methods of past narrative have a narrator. Tragedy doesn't narrate; it enacts, and that's the great breakthrough that actually enabled tragedy to take over the Greek world as far as narrative was concerned.
I love that you're talking about tragedy one-upping Homer, because I think too often as Hellenists and Homers, we don't like to admit that maybe there were no more epics anymore because tragedy was just that much better, right?
Yep.
Right, we have a special treat for viewers today. We have a correspondent in the field at the Ashmolean Museum. Oliver, I've never actually been there. What are some things you think we should look at in relation to sort of the Oresteia and this period in Greek myth?
Well, I suppose tellings of myth.
Okay.
And the point is that the painting tells myths differently. Paintings tell myths differently from poetry,
Okay.
from narration. And above all, they tell it quite differently from the embodiment of theatre. And theatre moves. The movement is the essence of theatre. Why it always annoys me when Aristotle, right near the end of the Poetics, says, tragedy can have its effect without movement. That's wrong. But of course, works of art, paintings, sculptures, metalwork, they tell without movement. They're telling it in quite a different way. So I'm rather fascinated to see what it is that our correspondent in the Ashmolean is looking at.
Any transition that involves saying Aristotle is wrong puts the next speaker on the spot. So Paolo Mani is in the Ashmolean Museum today with generous permission from the museum. Paul, do you want to show us around? Want to take us on a quick tour before we get started again?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. Hello, everyone. I feel like I should be doing it with my sort of hand up here, sort of do it with an earpiece. But I'm here with some old friends in the Ashmolean Museum. And as you say, a big thank you to everyone connected with the museum for letting us in here this evening. Joel, I just wanted to start here just because they have a rather superb bust of Homer. And I know as a Homerist, you would certainly appreciate that, which is wonderful. But actually, where I want to take you first of all, and we're going to come back and look at some more pieces later, is into their section which actually houses a lot of Mycenaean art. So this is art that's not created in the time that Aeschylus is writing, but rather in the time that the Agamemnon, this story, would have been happening. And you can see perhaps behind me some examples of Mycenaean pots from this very era. And I'd like to show you as we walk past this object, which is a rather superb helmet, which sort of matches up quite nicely to a description that Homer gives as well. But I'd like to just point out at this moment, this rather fantastic pot behind me, which you can see closer up on my face as well. And this is a vase that was done in Crete. This is of an octopus with only 6 legs, it should be noted. And what's particularly interesting about this in the context of what we're looking at is not only thinking about the way in which kings of the Mycenaean era might have been living, but also if we look a little bit closer at this pot, and I'm just having to walk around, I hope you can all follow me and see, but actually just in this area around here, you can just about make out the depiction of murex shells. Now, these were the shells that were used to create purple dye in the ancient world. And purple dye then being extremely hard to come by, and therefore the colour purple having a particularly strong significance and importance that we'll actually be meeting in the scene that we have coming up. So I'll leave you with that octopus and then hand back to you, Joel, in the studio.
Thank you. So this is the first time we've had the opportunity to go remote, even though we've all been fully remote. And maybe we'll be able to do more of this in the future. Paul's going to stay in the museum because he has to spend the rest of the week there now. He has to quarantine inside. And we'll see him again after the performance. So if anybody watching on YouTube or Twitter or something wants to see something particular, we may be able to direct him that way. So today, because this play is, as Fiona said, big, we're going to do the big thing and do the rest of it or most of it in one block, and then follow up with a discussion that may last a little longer than our typical discussions, but it's worth it. So we're going to skip a bit of the middle of the play. Clytemnestra talks to the citizens and gets a unique opportunity to really reflect on her own experiences with the, or in the absence of her husband. And it's a fascinating section because she can't reveal everything. Like the Watchman, there's an ox on her tongue. And as Oliver said, we have choruses coming in and out in this section, taking us back to the larger part of the war, going back to the abduction of Helen, to the sack of Troy. And in between, the citizens start to hear noises of a herald coming. The herald appears and announces what we already suspect from the watchfires that have been lit, and that's that the war is over and Agamemnon is coming home. We get to see Clytemnestra respond to the news in a series of sort of half revelations where she has to show a happy face to the crowd, but gives us innuendo. And we'll start with the next scene, the famous arrival of Agamemnon and the reunion of this least happy of husband and wives.
First, it is right for me to greet this land of Argos and its guardian gods. They share with me the credit for this safe return and for the justice that I visited upon the land of Priam. For the gods decided on the case from listening, not to speeches, but to the death of soldiers. And unanimously they then cast their votes into the urn for blood, the blood of Troy and its destruction. Only hope approached the other urn, but left it empty. And now the conquered city still remains conspicuous by its plume of smoke. The winds of ruination blow in lively gusts while dying embers spread about a greasy stench of wealth. For this the gods should be repaid with mindful thanks, because we have exacted punishment for a presumptuous act of theft. And in a woman's cause, the beast of Argos, offspring from the horse's womb, has ground the city into fragments. I mean the armored troop which launched its leap at dead of night, a flesh-devouring lion that jumped the walls and lapped its fill of princely blood. It's for the gods that I've drawn out this prelude. Also, remembering your sentiments, I quite agree you have me as corroboration. For it comes to few by nature to admire a friend in times of happy fortune with no taint of envy. I speak from my own knowledge, for I can read the mirror of true attitudes and see that those who seemed so well disposed to me were really shadows, ghosts. And as for what remains concerning gods and city, we'll convene assemblies that are communal, consulting all the people so we can consider how to make quite sure that what works well at present will remain effective in the longer term. And if there's any issue stands in need of remedy, we shall endeavour to avert malignant spread by the judicial use of surgery, the knife, or burning out. And now I'm going to go into my palace, my home and hearth, where first I shall do honour to the gods who sent me out and now have brought me back. I pray for victory, as she has followed me, to stay on steadfast at my side.
Gentlemen, you elder citizens of Argos, I am not ashamed to tell you of my husband-loving ways. It's from my own direct experience that I shall speak about the burdens of my life throughout the time this man was kept at Troy. It is a dreadful anguish for a woman sitting by herself at home without her male, forever listening to malignant rumors. They would arrive, man after man, announcing news of ever worse catastrophes. And as for wounds, if this man here had suffered blows as many times as was reported to this house, he'd be more perforated than a net. And if he died as often as these stories told, he'd have to have been triple-bodied like some second Geryon. Thanks to grim rumors of this sort, I've had to be unbound by others from the noose I'd fixed above and round my neck. And that is why our child, the token of our pledges, yours and mine, is not here by my side, as should have been the case. Orestes, don't be concerned at this, because a family friend is looking after him, King Strophius of Phocis. He wisely warned me of two grave uncertainties. The danger, you were threatened by at Troy. And secondly, suppose that popular unrest attempted to contrive a hostile plot. There is a tendency to kick a man who's down. So caution of this kind brings no deception with it. And as for me, the well springs of my tears are all dried up, with not a droplet left. My eyes are bleared from lying late awake and weeping for my beacons standing there inactive. When I did have dreams, they were so shallow, I'd be woken by the whine of a mosquito in my ear. And now that I've endured all this, I can, with heart released from grief, address this man of mine as guard dog of the fold. The forestay that secures the ship, the firm fixed pillar that supports the roof on high, dry land to storm-tossed sailors who'd lost hope, a flowing fountain to the thirsting traveler. I hold him worthy of descriptions such as these. But let this not attract resentment, since we've borne so many troubles in the past. And now, my dearest heart, step from this carriage, but do not, great king, set down upon the soil this foot which flattened Troy. Come, women, get on with your task of spreading fabrics all along the pathway he will walk. Yes, let us have a passage strewn with purple, so that justice may escort him well inside a home that lies beyond his hopes. Our close attention, ever wakeful, shall ensure that all the rest is, with God's help, rightly done.
Offspring of Leda, guardian of my house, your speech was fitting to my absence, stretching out at length. But proper eulogy remains a prize it's right for others to award. So do not pamper me in female fashion, nor like some barbarian bow down to me with gawping salutations. And stop this spreading of my path with woven stuff which might attract resentment. It's the gods who should be honoured in this style. For mortals to take steps upon such ornaments of beauty is, in my belief, a thing that's fraught with fear. So pay me homage like a man, I say, not like a god. There is a very different thing, a ring between the sound of footmats and of fancy fabrics. Keeping clear of dangerous thoughts remains the greatest gift from God. One should not call a life well blessed until it has been lived right through in full prosperity. If I can act entirely in this frame of mind, then I may rest secure.
Well, tell me this in open honesty.
For sure, I'll not betray my honest judgment.
Might some alarming turn have made you vow these to the gods?
If someone with authority had authorized this deed.
And Priam, if he'd had success like yours, what do you think?
I'm sure he would have stepped upon the precious cloths.
Then pay no heed to people's criticizing talk.
Yet grumbling from the populace can be a powerful force.
The unresented man's the one with nothing to be envied.
It's not a woman's place to show such relish for a fight.
Yet those who reap success may properly concede defeat.
Does victory in this contest mean so much to you?
Agree. You're still in charge if you give way to me by choice.
All right. If this is what you want. Here, somebody unlace my boots. And as I tread upon these fabrics dyed with purple, may no envious eye light on me from afar. I have deep qualms about destroying household properties by crushing underfoot these precious cloths that must have cost much silver coin. So much for that. And now this stranger. Offer her a kindly welcome. God looks favorably from afar upon the man who wields his power with gentleness. No one puts on the yoke of slavery on purpose. She's had to come along with me, the army's gift, the bloom, selected out of many captured spoils. Well, now I've been subjected to your wish like this, I'll make my way inside my house with trampling on purple.
The sea there is, and who could drain it dry? The sea produces many, many dye shells, an inexhaustible supply of welling purple, worth much silver, rich for steeping fabrics. Thank the gods we have a wealth of these, my lord. This house does not know poverty. I would have vowed to trample on innumerable woven cloths if that had been prescribed by prophets to ensure the deliverance of this man's life. As long as there's the root, the leafage can grow back around the house and spread its shade against the fierce dog days. And now that you've returned to your domestic hearth, your coming signals warmth in winter. And in summer, when the grapes are sour, there then is coolness through the palace, as the complete master ranges through his home. Zeus, God complete. Now see my prayers through to the end. Make sure those things that you ensure become complete.
Why does this clinking dread overcast me with foreboding, fluttering around my heart as I try to read the omen?
Why this prophetic chant with no pain and no commission?
Why can't my reason spit it out, dreamlike, and dismiss it? Time has gone aging on, since the sand jumped off the cables, hauled from the ocean bed when it sailed for Troy. That navy.
They have returned back home. My own eyes have been the witness, yet all the same my heart uninstructed sings within me dirge notes without lyre, dirge, and Eunice composes.
Dismissive of the strength that hope offers to oppose it. My heart is turning, weird with the dread of due completion. I hope my fears prove wrong, may it never reach completion.
Insatiable desire can fill a house too full. Corruption lives next door and leans against the wall.
A life that's laden rich, we strike on a dark reef, unless some dread can reach it first to keep it safe. By throwing off the scythe a share of all those goods, the house may then survive, not sunk by its cramped holes.
Once blood has splurted black and soaked the ground with death, there's none can chant it back to life from the stained earth.
An overriding fate holds back those who transgress.
A warning that my heart should make clear with full voice. It lurks in dark instead and murmurs in its pain and can't unwind the thread.
Meanwhile, my mind's aflame.
You, come along inside as well. It's you, I mean, Cassandra. Zeus, far from showing anger, has set you where you may share the rituals of the house and take your place with all the other slaves around the altar of our household Zeus. So, step down off this carriage and don't act aloof. They say that even Heracles was sold to be a slave and had feed on barley gruel. So since compulsion has tipped down the balance of your fortune, Count it as a blessing you belong to masters with ancestral wealth. Those who unexpectedly strike rich prove cruel owners, while from us, you shall receive what is the proper custom.
It's you she has been speaking to, and speaking clearly. Now that you've been captured in a fatal net, you should obey if you're going to.
Unless she speaks some unintelligible foreign tongue and chirps like a swallow, I should be reaching through until her understanding.
Go on. She's telling you what course is best for you. Obey and leave your seat here in the wagon.
I don't have time to waste out here. The animals are waiting ready for the sacrifice before the central altar of the palace. If you wish to join in this, then don't delay. Or if you can make nothing of my words, then wave your hands instead with alien gestures to communicate.
It seems the stranger needs a good interpreter. She's behaving like some new caught creature.
She's crazy and delusional. She has arrived here from a conquered city, yet she has no notion how to wear the bridle. Not, that is, before she has been broken in, her mouth blood-flecked with foam. I'll not waste further words on her, just to be disrespected in this way.
Well, I feel pity for you, so I'll not get angry. Come, poor woman, get down from this wagon, yield before necessity, and take on this new yoke.
Father! Apollo! Apollo!
Why these strange sounds about Apollo? He's not the god for someone who laments.
Apollo! Apollo!
There she goes again, profanely calling on the god who's not appropriate for joining cries for grief.
Apollo, appalling, you destroyed me. Now, for a second time, you easily destroy me.
It seems she is to prophesy her own misfortune. Although a slave, the gift remains strong in her mind.
Apollo, appalling, you destroyed me. What kind of home is this? Where's this you have drawn me?
This is the place of the sons of Atreus. If you did not know, I'm telling you the truth.
No, a house God-hating. It's a house that's freighted with much inbred bloodshed, where its own are butchered. A human abattoir, a blood-bespattered floor.
The stranger seems keen-scented like a hound. She's on track of murders, that's for sure.
This is what confirms me, what I see before me. These little ones bewailing their own cruel killing and the roasted meat their father had to eat.
We heard about your reputation as a prophet, but we do not need your visions.
Aye, so hard. What is this scheming? What trauma is this now? Utter wrong, this scheming, here within this house, unbearable, incurable, far off from all defense.
I cannot understand this prophecy. I recognize that other one. It is well known.
So harsh. So this is what you're hatching. The man who shares your bed, your husband. As you bathe him. How to tell the end. Immediate, inexorable, hand reaches over hand.
I still don't see. I'm at a loss to understand the prophecies these riddles are obscuring.
Such pain. Such pain! What's this that comes in sight? It is some Hades net. And she who draws it right is she who shares the bed, who shares the guilt of blood. So let the gloating crew, bloodthirsty for this race, strike up the triumph cry to mark this sacrifice.
What sorts of Eunice is this to you to crow above the house? Your words don't cheer me, no. The sallow drops of blood drain out from my pale cheeks to flood my heart, just as a wounded man's life fades together with his sunset rays.
It's plain. It's plain. Keep him from the cow, the bull. She wraps the robes around him, then see how she springs the trap and stabs him with her jet black horn. Down in the watery pool he falls, I tell of death, by tricks enough to fill a deadly murder bath.
I am no expert judge of prophecy, but all these things you say sound bad to me.
No human good that I can tell has ever come from prophet's skill. Their craft and many sayings lead to fearful things for us to learn.
Oh, so cruel a fate. I mean my own ordeal. It's for my death I cry, poured in to fill the bowl. Why have you dragged me here to this misery? For nothing but to share death's glory.
Mad-minded, God-possessed, frenetic, to set this music that's no music to your own fall.
You're like the nightingale for pity with her lament of Etis, perpetual.
Oh, the nightingale. With her clear ringing songs, the gods have fashioned her with feather-covered wings. She has a pleasant time, no cause to wail. For me, there waits the edge of sharpened steel.
These sorrows, God-possessed, onrushing, these elegies you mold with passion, where are they from?
These darkly piercing notes of mourning, waymarks of your prophetic journey, where are they from?
Oh, the marriage, joined with death by Paris, Scamander's waters, stream of my ancestors. Back then I grew from girlhood by your flowing whirlpools. Now though it seems I shall prophesy upon the banks where Chiron sweeps by.
Why are your words like this, all too precise? Even a child could hear and find it clear.
I feel the piercing bite of your cruel fate. You shake me to the core with notes of fear.
Oh, the suffering of my city's crushing. Oh, the ritual slaughter offered by my father. Those sheep flocks from our meadow prove no cure from death, though, no way to stop the city falling as it had to. And I shall spill to earth my hot blood too.
The horrors that you tell continue still. Some cruel divinity drums heavily and turns your melody to threnody.
I cannot understand how this will end.
No longer shall my prophecies peer out from veils, all coyly like a bride upon her wedding day. But springing freshly like the breezes from the rising dawn, they'll stir a swell that breaks yet greater grief upon the shore. No longer shall I offer hints from riddling clues. Bear witness, I'm a bloodhound, sniffing keenly on the scent of horrors perpetrated long ago, because there is a chorus never leaves this house. It sings in unison, but not in harmony. Its theme is not benign. It is a drunken band, fired up by swigging human blood, and yet they skulk inside, refusing to be sent away. What are they? Family Erinyes. They occupy the rooms and chant their anthem of the primal wrong, denouncing him, the one who trampled on his brother's marriage bed. Well, does my arrow miss, or does it hit the mark? Am I a cheating prophet, just a burbling fortune teller hawking door to door?
I am amazed at you. Although brought up across the seas, you have the power to tell what happened in an alien place, as though you had been standing by.
It was Apollo raised me to this role as prophetess.
He was enraptured with desire, you mean? A god?
Before now I was too ashamed to speak of this. He twined his limbs around mine, breathing sweetness.
And did the two of you join in the act that makes a child?
I promised that I would, but then refused.
Were you imbued already with God-given powers?
I was already prophesying all Troy's sufferings.
How could Apollo anger let you stay unharmed?
Since I offended him, no one believes a word I say.
To us, your prophecies appear convincing.
Ah! Again, the piercing anguish of foretelling true comes swirling up and thrums me with discordant preludes. Look! See those children like the forms in dreams that sit around the house. Their hands are full of meat, a home-cooked feast. It's their own offal they're holding, clear, such pitiable portions, innards that their father gorged upon. And in revenge for this, I say that there is one, the jackal, lolling in the lion's bed, the stay at home, who's planning to catch the master when he comes. The leader of the fleet and the conqueror of Troy has no idea how the hateful bitch can use her tongue, how she can fawn and lick and brightly dip her ears, then bite. So daring is the female killer of the male. What could I call this loathsome creature? Viper with envenomed fangs at either end, or snapping Scylla lurking on the rocks, a threat for sailors? A gaping, hellish mother set on war with her own family. How brazenly she whooped her cry of triumph as though it was a battle turning point, while seeming joyful at his safe return. It makes no difference if I fail convincing you, because the future will be coming all the same. And soon you shall be standing there and pitying me, and calling me the one whose prophecies infallibly turn out too true.
I recognize Thyestes and his feast of children's meat. It makes me shudder when I hear it so directly put in words.
But as for all the rest I heard from you, I'm trying to interpret, but I lost the track.
With your own eyes, I say, you shall see Agamemnon dead. Oh, Father, how I feel for you and your noble sons.
What's the matter? Why recoil in fear? Why retch like that? Is this convulsion in your mind?
The whole house reeks of murder, dripping blood.
No, that's just the smell of ritual sacrifice.
It's like the fetid stench exuding from a tomb.
It can't be the exotic incense that you mean.
No longer shall I flutter like a frightened bird. Now I shall go inside and sing laments for Agamemnon and myself. Enough of life. Strangers, I ask you this. Bear witness, after I am dead, that I was right once it's happened. That a woman has met death to make amends for me. A woman and a man has been laid low to match a badly mated man. As a stranger on the point of death, I ask this favor from you.
Poor woman, I feel pity for the fate you have foretold.
I wish to add just one more word, a swan song for myself. I call on this, my final shining sun. Make sure my killers pay back dear with their own blood for me. The victim slave, the easy catch. This is the way it is for humans. If they had good fortune, it is like a shadow. If they are unfortunate, it takes a dampened sponge to wipe the picture clean away. And I feel far more pity for these things than those.
It is only human nature never to know satisfaction.
With success, and no one tries to stop it moving into mansions.
Which set envious fingers pointing, no one orders no admission.
This is true of this man, even when the gods have favored with the prize of taking Priam's city.
And of coming home in honor, all the same, if now he has to pay for murder done by former
generations, and to die for his own killings, and by dying,
bring about just further killings. If all this, then who could claim that?
any human may be born to happy fortune safe from troubles.
Oh! I've been struck. Deep. Fatal.
Oh, keep quiet. Who is that shouting about deadly wounds?
Oh, again! I'm struck again! Ah!
It is the king. He cries a sound like the deed is done. We should decide together on the safest course.
I offer no apology for saying things that contradict what I have said before to suit the moment. How else, if you are planning harm against your enemies who think they're friends, how else are you to rig the trap of nets too high to be escaped by leaping over them? My mind has long been working out this final contest in my long-drawn feud. And now, at last, it has arrived. I stand here where I struck with what is done in front of me. I managed it, and I am proud of this, in such a way that he could not escape his fate, nor fend it off. I cast around him an impenetrable mesh, like one for netting fish, a fatal luxury of fabric. Then I struck him twice. With 2 cries, his limbs went limp. Once he was down, I followed with a 3rd, an offering made in gratitude to Hades, the safe keeper of the dead below. And so he gasped his life away and spouted out a jet of blood that showered me with a drizzle of dark dew. And I was glad as is the crop of corn to feel the gleaming moisture gift of Zeus when grain is brought to birth from out the husk. It is a proper offering to pour upon this corpse, this blood. It's just, and even more than just, because this man had filled a cup of such accursed crimes within this house. And now he has returned and drained it to the dregs. So that is how things are, you Argive elders. Be glad if you are gladdened. As for me, I revel in all this.
I am astounded at your brazen tongue. You're bragging like this over your own husband.
You patronize me like some little woman with no mind to call her own. I speak with heart devoid of fear to those with wit to understand. And you can praise me or condemn me as you like. It's all the same to me. This man is Agamemnon. Yes, my spouse, and yes, a corpse. The work of this right hand of mine, this architect of justice. And that is that.
How am I to weep for you? Oh, my king, my king.
What heartfelt words of loyal lament can I turn to song?
You lie where you breathe your last in this spider's web.
Prisoner of slavish bonds on this squalid bed.
Hobbled by this deadly trick, you met with your end.
Dropped down by a 2-edged blade gripped in your wife's hand.
In my judgment, this man's death was no more squalid than was fitting. It's right that he has perished. through deception, since he ruined this whole family with deception. Yes, the darling that I bore him, dearly wept Iphigenia. He, her father, made his victim. Now he suffered suitably to match his actions. He will have no cause to bluster down in Hades. Now he's paid by fatal sword stroke.
I remain at a loss, helpless without resource, which way to turn my mind before the falling house.
I fear the drumming storm beating upon the home, the deluge turned to blood, a pelting hurricane.
Now fate whets action edge, keen on the sharpening stone, preparing to ensure that there's more justice done.
Oh, earth! Oh, earth! I wish you'd cover me before I'd set my eyes on this man brought to such a lowly bed, this bath with silver sides.
Who comes to bury him? Who to lament?
Could you now have the gall, when you have killed your husband, to stand there and lead the funeral wail?
To favor his past life, disfavourably in tribute for his deeds.
Who shall proclaim the graveside eulogy with heart that truly bleeds?
It is not your proper place to raise this matter. By my hand, he dropped down, downed in death, and by my hand, he shall be laid down under, not with mourning from outsiders. Aptly shall his daughter greet him, his adored Iphigenia, meet her father at the ferry landing by the aching river, and embrace him, planting kisses.
Damnation meets the condemnation back.
To judge is difficult.
The plunderer gets plundered in his turn.
The killer pays for guilt.
Yet this remains as long as Zeus remains.
Upon his throne secure.
Who does the deed must suffer for the deed.
That's the eternal law.
Who can eliminate the seed expel?
The household curse at last.
This family, in dire catastrophe, are glued together fast.
Yes, you've hit upon the truth with that pronouncement. So I'm willing to agree a solemn promise with the daimon of this bloodline, that if only it will go and leave this family and oppress some other house with kindred murders, I shall be content to manage with a fraction of our riches, just enough and nothing further. This I promise, if I can then purge this household from the madness of our killing one another.
I greet you. Welcome, light of day that brings me justice. I can say at last that gods look down from high upon the crimes of earth and make sure humans pay the price. Since now I see this man here lying in the woven cloths of the Erinyes and paying for the plot his father perpetrated. That father, Atreus, was the ruler of this land when he was challenged for the kinship by Thyestes, my own father and his brother. Atreus drove him out, an exile from his house and land. Unfortunate Thyestes then returned, a suppliant at the hearth, which was a way to save his blood from staining his ancestral soil. But as an act of hospitality with enthusiasm more than love towards my father, godless Atreus made out to be arranging a great celebration feast. And there he served him up a dish of children meat. He hacked away their heads and hands and feet and served Thyestes as he sat apart with portions that could not be recognized. So in his ignorance, he ate a dish which, as you see, has proved disastrous for the dynasty. Then once he realized his monstrous act, He cried out in revulsion, and recoiling spewed the gobbets out. He kicked the feasting table over, and so made it fit the justice of his curse. Like this, I pray, the whole bloodline be overturned. In consequence of that, you see, this man brought low, and I have pieced this death together with the thread of justice, for I was the third child, left alive, and driven into exile as a little baby with my wretched father. Justice has returned me here. Now that I am full grown and I have got this man into my grip, although I was outside the house itself, by linking the whole scheme behind this deadly plot. So even death would seem acceptable for me, now that I've seen him tangled in the cords of justice.
Aegisthus, I have no respect for one who acts all high and mighty in bad circumstances. You claim you meant to kill this man and plan this pitiable murder?
Well, I proclaim that once you're brought to justice, you shall not escape the people's stones and curses flung at you. But why not strike this warrior down yourself, you coward? Why do it through a woman, bringing down pollution on the country and its gods?
I only hope Orestes is alive somewhere, so he may yet return here with good fortune to become the champion, killer of the pair of you.
Since you've decided on this way to act with bluster, you'll soon have to learn your lesson.
Come now, my fellow fighters, close to time for action.
Come on now, my soldiers, hands on sword hilts ready.
And my hand is ready also, and I'm quite prepared to die here.
Yes, you're saying die is welcome. We accept that offer.
No, my dearest, let's not do more damage. We've already reaped enough unhappy harvest. Let's not have yet further bloodshed. Go back to your houses, you respected elders, before you suffer. Yield to how things are determined. We have done the things we had to do. If this proves the end of troubles, we would welcome that, since we've been lacerated by the diamond's talon. Well, that is my woman's contribution, in case anybody thinks it worthy of attention.
But to have these people letting loose their tongues against me, trying out their luck in hurling their defiance, should they be allowed to scorn their ruler without thinking?
Argives could not stoop to bow before a worthless creature.
I shall still be looking out to get my hands on you in future.
Not if some divinity directs Orestes back to Argos.
I am well aware that those in exile feed themselves on hoping.
All right. All right. Feed fat yourself and mess with justice while you have the chance.
Trust me. You shall pay back dearly for this mad defiance.
Keep on crowing like a cock parading by his headbird.
Take no notice of their futile yapping. You and I shall take control together and set straight the powers of this palace.
I feel almost unequal to the task of responding to this performance or the play, but I think it's done a great job of giving us an idea of the scale and the depth of the power of Aeschylus Agamemnon, even so many years later in a different language on our flat screens. Fiona, I'm usually bowled over in tragedy at how many tonal shifts there are in a performance. But in this play especially, watching these moments, it seems especially pointed. How we move from sort of the focus on Clytemnestra to Agamemnon and the chorus shifts from time to time. This is a naive and simple-minded question, but how are we supposed to feel at the end of this play?
As you say, wow. I mean, I that was such a stunning, I don't know how long it was. It was so pasty. There were twists, there were turns, there were...
You muted yourself, Fiona. Please come back.
Sorry, what I suddenly am reminded of is some comments by a number of people at the end of the 19th century who identify the Cassandra scene as the moment when drama, we would say theatre, modern understanding of theatre actually began. And in a very real sense, I think we felt that this evening because we watched that very bizarre, stately, horrible sequence of Agamemnon's return, which often in performance is not only very, very slow, but is often in kind of scenic terms translated into Clytemnestra on a higher level. Agamemnon up at first in a chariot, but then descending in order to make his ascent. So this kind of playing with kind of different levels in performance to signify that there is no communication between these two. And I think tonight, you know, hearing Agamemnon's opening words and wondering, who is he talking to? And of course, that's what we're saying in the theatre, even more if we're seeing Clytemnestra there being ignored. But of course, that really, this Clytemnestra tonight reminded us that doesn't matter because she is so much in control of this whole situation and the twists and turns of the rhetoric, and above all, her extraordinary ability to seduce this man who has no apparent feeling for her, as indeed she has no positive feeling, and we know that, we feel it. But there is some chilling, compelling, erotic drive that, talking about shift of moods, comes, of course, absolutely in that scene when she emerges with the corpses from the palace of Agamemnon.
So I love the way you phrase it as her like being in absolute control. And if anything, emphasize that it's the end of the play when Aegisthus is such a useless like dandy, right? Which or whatever we want to call him, right? So I have to ask, why do we call this play the Agamemnon and not the Clytemnestra?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Whose play is it? And remarkably, I think Oliver might correct me, well, you may correct me, but I think there are only about I think Agamemnon only has 200 lines in the whole play. He's obviously there on the stage as a corpse, and as we understand it, right until the very, very end, so that extraordinary scene of near civil strife, I mean civil war, is literally about to break out in front of us. The corpses and Agamemnon, as well as Cassandra, are there in front of us. So you say he's a dandy at the end, but I also think, and I felt that tonight as well, that he is the tyrant. And I was reminded tonight in Oliver's translation that even if Agamemnon does not speak to Clytemnestra on his return, he speaks very much to his people, and he talks about assemblies that are communal, that this is call him anachronistically a kind of constitutional monarch, if you like. This is someone who has a sense of the people who he represents, and as we see through the elders, people who have voices. Whereas quite clearly And presumably in 5th century terms, Aegisthus at the end is only a ruler who gets his power through killing his predecessor. In other words, he is a Greek tyrant. And I think that very much is there in that final scene. And I think the chorus makes that very clear.
And it's powerful because we are at this moment, even though Clytemnestra has prevailed, there's this instability, right? And if we think in terms of homecoming narratives in general, I like the fact that you're bringing up this idea of tyranny in the assemblies, because there are echoes again of the Odyssey, right? This dovetailing of what happens when the suitor takes over and the king returns home after so long. Well, there's murder on one side or another. Right. Now, Oliver, you said you cued us into listen to sort of differences in the actors' performances between the lyric passages and the non-lyric. What did you hear? How did you react to this? And has it changed the way you see the play at all?
Well, I think what in a way my own, I'm strange way of putting it, my own translation revealed to me when I heard it, was these two incredible roles, the role of Cassandra and the role of Clytemnestra, two of the greatest women's roles in the history of theatre. And their whole register was so different. That the language they spoke, I mean, I felt I'd done better than I realized in bringing out the completely different ways in which they expressed that. They both had power, but a completely different kind of power. And the whole tone, the whole relationship between their language and reality was so different. Clytemnestra so controlled, so, you know, you speak to me as if I was some little woman with no mind of her own. Or the lines where she said that Iphigenia would welcome her father down by the river. That really was incredibly well done and extremely powerful. And I think the Cassandra's visions in a totally different linguistic register, and two extraordinary women's roles in two completely different kinds of power. That was the thing I was most pleased and enlightened by in hearing it.
And I would like to personally congratulate you for what you achieved in this translation, because you simultaneously made it understandable, but you didn't sacrifice the level of register, which you mentioned, right? I mean, it still feels like it's heightened and raised, but it was understandable all the way through. And I think in part we can thank the actors for it. So maybe we'll start. I'll leave the director for a little bit, but I want to start with Evie and Tim. You're in the same screen. Evie, you've played Cassandra before, but today's Cassandra took it, let's say, dialed it up past 11 to 12 a bit. So what did you see in the narrative of this particular play for Cassandra that you hadn't seen in others?
I loved the way, and thank you, Oliver. It was a pleasure to read. I loved the way that there was a really clear distinction that she makes between the first section where we see her, everything is incoherent and it feels this complete rush of emotion, really, and panic. And then she calms herself to some degree and says, I'm not going to babble anymore. It's going to be clear. I'm going to be clear. And I mean, that's a joy as an actor. That's a real gift to have the kind of the distinction between intention and the distinction between the kind of mood and the emotion. And it's lovely and very important, I think, especially when you're playing a character who's kind of in a heightened state, to remember what they need and want. And this was so clear in this script, that, you know, to be understood and to kind of, to have something that continues after she's dead, to get that message through. So it was a real joy.
And I mean, you brought it out so well, especially in that section where she's giving her own backstory, right? You give the backstory of the family, you also talk about your own prophecy, and just sort of that treading that line between losing it and conveying your own story. I mean, that's it's a fabulous task that you took on, and you did, and really it was amazing. And I have to echo Oliver. I mean, you and Eunice, I mean, made this performance. I'm going to save Eunice for a few minutes from now. I don't want to make Tim feel left out because he got to be all the men in the play. But so Tim, you're Watchman.
Can I just say, Joel, if you add to Evie's performance the element of music in the first half and the element of movement, then think it was so powerful just hearing it. Think what it would be with music and movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And because you guys do an amazing amount in a very small space, right? You might as well only have heads in this space. But Tim, so you played 3 very different characters. So the Watchman, I believe, was a late addition, but you really built some sort of suspense and questions there. And then just at the end is his own sort of question mark. But then there's Agamemnon right in the middle, the man everyone's been waiting for. Can you sort of walk us through your mental space for each of those characters?
Yeah, I mean, it was great fun actually playing the Watchman. I think, as Oliver was mentioning earlier, I think it was Oliver mentioning how brilliant a start to this play, or maybe it was Fiona. Sorry, just as a sort of dramatic start, an opening. It's very exciting, and just as an actor, sort of reading those words and the tension that is so present there. I just loved it. I loved it. And it really made me, it just made me want to do, I mean, this is having read lots of these now, having done lots of these Wednesday evenings, this tonight was, I really suddenly realized the greatness of this play, because it was the one that made me just desperately want to get back on stage and perform it. It's so exciting. And then having the opportunity of playing these other 2 very different characters, as you say, was thrilling. I mean, it's very exciting for an actor to be able to kind of attack those roles. But I think what stands out for me reading both Agamemnon and Aegisthus tonight is just that they're both kingly, they're both powerful in their different ways, they're both very strong men, or at least they that's the way they want to present, or they try and present themselves. But it's fascinating how Clytemnestra's presence, and as soon as she opens her mouth, they're sort of impotent, and despite this bravado and bluster, it was really noticeable. Just and that's credit to Eunice as well, obviously, just a brilliant performance. But that is an amazing character who I don't know. Also, it's frustrating doing these in a way, because something like this, I just want to get into a rehearsal room and properly explore it more. Yeah. To do it proper justice. Yeah.
What I really like of what you just said, Tim, is the way that performing and reading all these plays for the past 30 weeks has heightened our knowledge and understanding of them. And I feel like, maybe Toph, Oliver, Fiona, and I can get together and bestow degrees on all the actors. No, because what you're really doing, we're doing a graduate program, advanced graduate degree in the performance of ancient theater. And I've learned more, I think, than I did in years in graduate school, and going through these plays every week and watching it. And I'm going to use that to move over to Eunice. Eunice, I was really upset that we delayed the Agamemnon this far in the calendar, but every minute of delay was worth it, because I had your other Clytemnestras in my head and all of this work. So you've played Clytemnestra on a few occasions. What did this moment and this play and this translation bring to it anew? What is behind the powerful performance you just gave?
I think this evening, and with the script, and thank you, Oliver, because it has such clarity to it, and actually such ease in its journey. And by that, I don't mean to say, oh, it's easy doing this. But it is easy doing it because you want to do them. And you want to discover their stories, and because there is that need and want to do them and to find out more about them, sort of makes it bizarrely easy. Because for me, the connections to Clytemnestra, I can see it, and and with the other things I've done as well. They're such human beings. They're the rare, sort of naked, raw human being. If you just stripped them down, it's either how we would all like to behave, how we think underneath. There's nothing difficult or awkward about Clytemnestra, I don't think, because it is, of course she thinks like that. Of course she does. Wouldn't you if you've been stuck at home 10 years? And he's killed your daughter. Of course you'd want. Whether you actually go and kill him is another thing. We all go, but
your certainty and empathy as an actor really brings that out. But I'm more convinced than ever, though, that Aeschylus as a poet had that as well, right? Because you're not imposing this on the narrative, right? You're bringing it out of the poem.
Oh, yes.
And I want you to know, I think everybody on YouTube and Twitter wanted to murder Agamemnon because of you. Right? And at the end, I think if you had turned around and said, you know what, Aegisthus has to go too, all of us would have been like, yeah, let's go with Clytemnestra.
Yeah, and then I can just go next.
Right.
But also, for me, I don't know whether it's because you're doing it like this. Goodness knows what would happen if we had an open stage, as we always say. But it's like having your foot on the pedal, your foot on the gas, playing Clytemnestra, whilst at the same time holding the handbrake. Because she can just, no matter how much she goes in there, she can just switch it off.
Yeah.
And go to something else. But I thought all the sort of poetic moments, the poetic language part, as opposed to the description part, it's almost like she needs those as a rest almost, that they transport her even higher. It's just like, it's actually like she's singing in those moments, and it's just a joy. I look forward to these. It's just a joy.
Well, and you I think shared that joy with hundreds of people at this point. So thank you. Tamieka, you've had the pleasure of being the chorus before, and I'm going to go back through and just watch your facial expressions, right? Because you are so expressive. But it's too bad Carlos had to leave, because the two of you together are like perfect sort of parentheses, right? Moving and shaping the action. What was this play like that was different from others? And what sort of thought processes did you go through as the chorus?
Well, I guess I can only speak for myself since Carlos is not here. For me, going into it, it was stakes were already high. And as we continue through, the stakes just continue to get higher and higher and higher. And they haven't peaked yet, because this is just the first one. So yeah, that's how I tackled this, was high stakes. And this mountain that we had to climb, and the stakes just keep getting higher, and how the elders feel about Clytemnestra, and the hope that Agamemnon brought, and then him being killed, and it's like, oh crap, now what are we going to do? And then here comes Aegisthus. Yeah, stakes just kept getting higher and higher.
I can't help but thinking like, oh, it kept getting worse. We didn't know what's going to happen next. As sort of the Oresteia is the ancient world's 2020.
Yeah.
Right. I know. So I don't know how much that sort of weariness and exhaustion like works into your process. Like, do you feel that in this play, or am I projecting too much?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's emotionally and mentally exhausting.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good way to think of it. And the one character, right, who doesn't seem that way, who maintains strength, is that amazing Clytemnestra. Toph, you have now been a special guest, an expert, you've been a performer, and now you've directed one of these plays in the Zoom environment. First, what has that process been like? And then sort of take us through your vision of the play and how you shaped it.
Well, thanks. It was just such a delight to see it come to life like this, and how quickly these things come together would probably surprise many of the people watching. We don't have a lot of rehearsal time, and I'll say, having to direct it this time, I realized how much thought does go in advance and alongside the rehearsals as well. For me, I really wanted the musicality of the chorus to come through as much as it could, and not let the individual choristers become individuals, but stay as a collective unit, so that there was that group against which each of Tim's characters would respond, and it would be a group sympathizing with Cassandra, and then at the end a group that really hated the imposition and the rule of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. And I think the performers really were great at bringing out the instability of the polis at the end of the play and how fragile things are at the end there. We see the chorus rising up against two of the actors, and that tension is a really odd note to leave the play on. And of course, it's going to be picked up either an hour later or next week in our case, in the next play. But it's always sort of hanging as a question about how tenuous Clytemnestra's rule is.
And I think the way you guys staged it and closed it really brought out the tension needing resolution that I don't think I ever really felt before, like especially not reading it on paper or in English or Greek, right? And so you definitely said, wait, what's going to happen? So again, thank you for that. And some of the details like Tamieka and the red, and just that moment, many people commented on the moment of having Cassandra in profile behind Agamemnon. That image was really powerful. And I don't know, Tim and Evie, maybe you should take that and put that in your house as sort of your photo. Right? I mean, it's eerie.
How we sit often, just on a Saturday night.
Oh my goodness. So we're way over time, but we're in the penalty period, so we're all right. I get to call it. Paul, we haven't forgotten you. You're still in the Ashmolean. Have they locked you in, and are things coming to life?
That's it. I'm actually under attack from numerous Mycenaean objects as we speak. And I just, first of all, I just want to say like a huge thank you to everyone who's been involved this week. It's been absolutely amazing to see it all. I just wanted to show at this moment the replica of the so-called death mask of Agamemnon. I didn't want to show it in advance because of any spoilers for anyone who didn't know what happens. But I was also drawn to one other object when I was looking around here earlier on. And I just thought it was something that was sort of quite fitting for this play in particular. And I don't know if you can make it out clearly enough. It's actually this object just here, which is a bathtub-shaped coffin, a larnax, which seems very appropriate for this play, and perhaps was something that that Clytemnestra could use immediately after the action that we've just seen. But I think it's really one of the things I wanted to kind of touch upon by visiting the museum, and thank you again to the Ashmolean and to Jude, who's been very patiently waiting with me all this time, is the way that different art forms can inspire each other, and how these plays that we're reading didn't happen sort of in a vacuum where there's only plays going on. there's all this other creation that is happening at the same time, and how they can inform each other. Obviously, the pieces I've looked at this evening are from the Mycenaean era, but perhaps we'll find another opportunity to come back and look at some 5th century art at some point in the future.
Thank you, Paul. And just to echo what Oliver said at the beginning is that each art form has its own grammar and form, right? So the images on vases can really flesh out what we know about what audiences might have been thinking about ancient myths and storytelling, especially when we have the Oresteia and associated scenes. So maybe we can send you out. And we also have, you know, in a post-coronavirus world, we could set up performances in front of museums and have sort of pop-up Zoom readings of Greek tragedy. So Paul is going to become a sort of, you know, Zoom theater gorilla in the future. We have a few announcements before we wrap up today. I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to plug our competition, Playing Medea. You can look on one of the websites. It's a competition where you film, if you're a high school student, a college student in the US, the UK, Canada, or Greece, you can film a scene from the Medea, submit it, and win prizes. The money prizes in the US, it's $400 for first place, $200 for second place, ×2, and there are individual Canadian and US categories. That's due on Friday the 23rd, but don't tell anybody. We may be a little flexible with the deadlines. The UK and Greece competitions are due December 18th, so you've got a lot of time to think about it, but you know, early birds get to submit early. We also have our friend from Relative Theatrics, Laura, who'd like to share some stuff with us today.
Hello, my name is Laura Deloge. I'm in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages at the University of Wyoming. And I'm here to tell you about an opportunity that's happening tomorrow, starting at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, when Relative Theatrics will be presenting a virtual reading of the Agamemnon. And I'd like to thank Professor Taplin for his kind permission to use his translation for that reading. If you are interested in joining us for that reading, you can go to relativetheatrics.com, where you can register and receive the Zoom link to join us. After the reading, I have the pleasure of moderating a community discussion. If you can't join us, the reading will be recorded, and the discussion, though, will not. And this event is a free event, and all are welcome to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for all that you're doing. Before we let you go, I want to let you know that the story of the Oresteia is not yet done. We're going to stick with this translation and this fabulous cast for the next 2 weeks. So next week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. here, 8 in the UK, we'll have the libation bearers, followed the next week by Eumenides, and it's going to be fabulous. Before we close, I want to thank the crew that makes this happen. Lana, our executive producer, Keith, Janet, Emma, Elen, Sarah, the posters designed by, the image by John Coley, the poster by Ali, and all of our friends at the Cosmos Society and Center for Hellenic Studies out of Chaos Theater who make this happen. Thank you. Stay safe.